Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we have a new session. So we will talk about connections and we will focus on Salesforce and HubSpot. So this is session number 4 that we want to host, and hopefully it will answer any questions that you might have. So let's take a look at the agenda here. So we will talk a bit about Salesforce and HubSpot and which are the best practices with regards to these connections. Then I will show you within MyRapidi these connection types. Then we'll have a recap. So then you have all the information that you need. Then we have questions in case you need to ask anything specific, and I will try to give you the best answer possible. And then we have upcoming sessions because we continue with our sessions. And last but not least, we have resources. Now, let's talk a bit about best practices. So first, when it comes to Salesforce, it's really important that you use an integration user. So this has to be like an user that's dedicated, right, for this integration. And it's better to do it this way instead of using your own access, right? Because it will ensure continuity. If a person leaves the company, then you will still be able to run your integration without any issues. And then, of course, when you have a dedicated user, then you will have a really good audit trail of everything that it's happening in your Salesforce org. Second would be API user profile and permissions. So of course, when you create this integration user, then you have to give it the right access and permissions, right? So then based on what you integrate, then you would need to go ahead and assign the right permission sets. And then, of course, we know that in Salesforce, there are API limits, which are set for each org. And then we also have to highlight the fact that you have to use sandbox for testing purposes and then move into production. So it's always good to do that. A very important thing here is that you can always create a copy of your production environment. So within your production environment, you can create a sandbox instance. And that sandbox instance can be a full copy or a partial copy of your production environment. So that's the place where you would play around with, data and test, right? And then when you are done with that, you can go back to production, right, and enable everything. And of course, here the sandbox environment can always be refreshed. For example, if you need more data, then you can do that. You refresh it in your Salesforce instance, and then the sandbox environment would be a copy of your live environment. And then last but not least, we have the field level security. So when you provide the user with access, you have to make sure that this user has the right read and write access to all the fields that you are using on the integration. So a very important thing here is that this integration user, it's a separate license that you can use. So that's already included in your current company setup. So you don't need to purchase, let's say, a separate license to set this up. You already have it there available. You just need to set up a permission set for it and give it the proper access. And then you should be good to go. And then all the data should go back and forth. So that was for Salesforce. Now we talk a bit about HubSpot. Here, we want to highlight the same things. First, use a specific user for your integration. Don't use your own access to transfer data because then it will be very difficult for you to tell who made changes and where, right? If you're using your own access, then nobody will know who created this record or who changed the specific information. So you can have a user set up and it will ensure continuity. Second, of course, you have to look at scope selection. So you have to give the proper access to this user so that your integration runs correctly, right? So you needed to have access to the objects that you want to integrate. Then you have to keep in mind the rate limits, which are more specific on HubSpot than Salesforce. So they have per second requests that you have to comply with. And of course, you have daily limits that can vary based on the subscription that you have. And then, of course, you have sandbox and production. Always use sandbox for testing purposes, anything you want to do for your specific integration. And when you are done with this part, then you can deploy it into production. And another thing here with HubSpot, which is different, would be about the custom objects access. Of course, here you have to ensure that you do have the possibility to create them, because as you know, in HubSpot, there are different subscriptions types and different access to certain objects. So make sure that you check that before using custom objects for your integration. So that was for HubSpot. Then I will show you right now in MyRapidi how these connections are being set up. So I will go here and add this one. Okay. So first and foremost, so this is the connections section, right? When you log in into Rapidi, then you would be able to go to connections and see what you have configured so far, right? So then, just as an example, I'll show you this. So for example, this is a HubSpot connection. So this has been set up and has been authorized by that specific user. So here you would see when this connection has been authorized and the date, right? So then you can tell exactly when this happened. Here at the bottom, you have different actions. So you can copy this connection if you want to. So, and then it will create a copy of it. Then you can authorize it, you can test it, and then redesign. So this is something that you would see both on HubSpot and the Salesforce connections. Now, when it comes to Authorize, of course, here you would use this button if you want to set up a new connection. So it's the first time you are doing it. So you are authorizing it for the first time, or you want to authorize it again, right? For example, you want to change the user. So then what you will do, you authorize it the second time, then you will be redirected to the login page, and then you will be using the other user. And then when you are done with the authorization, then this part here will be updated. It will say, authorized and the date when this happened and the user that did that, right? So it will give you information about that part. Then you have the last two pieces, which would be test and redesign. Test is the first thing that you want to do after you have authorized the connection. You want to make sure that you can connect to this instance. So you click on test and then wait for the confirmation message. Then last but not least, we have redesign. So here, redesign is actually going to read all the objects that this user has access to. So it's going to read everything that I have access to. If I have access only to specific objects, then that's the only thing I'm going to see. If I have full access, so I can access anything in HubSpot, then I will be able to see that here too. So then you click on redesign and then you wait for the process to be completed. And then in the end, you should be able to see the layout, right, on any of your transfers. Now here, one thing that has to be mentioned is that if you create a custom object, if you create new fields in HubSpot or Salesforce, then you have to go in and redesign again because you have to refresh the layout. Right, so the moment when you read it, it will read everything that you have in that specific moment. If later on you created more objects, you have more fields, or let's say a newer setup, then you have to redesign again, and you should have access to the latest version of those objects or fields. So that would be for HubSpot. Now I will show you Salesforce as well, so you can see that this one is that, this one is more or less the same. The only thing here is that when you set up a new connection to Salesforce, you will still go through the same process. You authorize it, but you get more information here. So when you authorize the Salesforce connection, you get this message saying authorized. You see the date and time, the user that has done that, and then you will be able to see the Salesforce org. Now, what's different with Salesforce is that you authorize the connection and then you are done. So you can connect to it and read data. But then if you have a sandbox refresh, you have to authorize it again. And that's because after a sandbox refresh, the Salesforce org will be changed. So you get a new one that you will be using for your new sandbox environment. So that's something that will need to be done if you are refreshing your sandbox, let's say every 6 months or every year, and you still want to continue testing. Right. And then if you are in that situation when you had a sandbox refresh and you need to connect to the new instance, you go through the same process, you authorize it, you log in into that specific environment, and then this message will be updated with the new date, right, and time, the same user or maybe the new user, and then the new Salesforce org. And after you are done with that, you will need to go to test. So you test it just to make sure that you can connect, and then you redesign. And the idea is that whenever you authorize or reauthorize a connection, you have to make sure that you do redesign, and then you can get all the objects and all the fields in there. If you don't redesign, then probably you will not have the latest version of all those objects and fields. So make sure to do that. And then the other thing is the same as HubSpot. If you create new objects, if you have custom ones, and then maybe you also have custom fields, then you also need to go to your connection here, redesign, and get the new layout. It will be like a refresh done on the connection side, and then you will be able to see everything in there. Now, if we talk about setting up a connection, I will show you how to do it. I will go and do that. So I want to set up a new connection here. This is Salesforce, right? So then it will automatically give it a code, like the next one that's available. In my case, would be the 5th connection that I'm setting up, right? So then I'm going to save it. So I'm going to keep this description in here, and then I want to authorize it. So I'll go and authorize it. When you click on it, you get to see this message. This message is very important because it says, of course, if you are already logged into a different Salesforce org, then log out if you don't need to authorize that one, right? Because sometimes you can be already logged into a specific org, but you want to authorize the sandbox one. So log out of the live one and make sure that you are not in there anymore, and then authorize the one that you have here. So I will say that. And then here, what I need to do, I need to add my username and password. And then another thing that you will need to do in the URL up top, you will see the generic Salesforce login page, which is login.salesforce.com. But you would have your own URL. So then you will need to replace the base URL, login.salesforce.com, with your own. And only after that, authorize the connection. I got this message saying authorization succeeded, this user with this org, and you can now test the connection, right? So this is my new connection. I have authorized this one today, so earlier, the user and the Salesforce org that I have. So what I want to do now, I want to test it, make sure it works. Okay, yeah. So we can test that, and then you have to go and click on redesign. Of course, when you click on redesign, it can take a couple of minutes. It very much depends, how much data you have access to. So if you have like an admin access, you can definitely access hundreds of objects. If you have limited access, let's say you only access 10 objects, then this will be a very fast process. In my case, I have admin access, so I can see everything I have in my org. So then this could take a couple of minutes to complete. But it's something that you can initiate and then just allow it to run, right? Like you don't need to do anything with it. You just have to allow it to read the objects. And as you can see here, then it will say, how many objects I have access to, right? And then here you will be able to see the actual objects and their names. So this is really great with Salesforce, is that you get to see those specific objects that you have access to. So it will go through all of them, read all objects and their corresponding fields. And then when this is done, it will just say that it has been completed, and you can go ahead and search for any objects or any fields. So that was for Salesforce. Now we want to do one for HubSpot. Well, this one is a bit different. So we'll just go for HubSpot here. We'll just say new connection. In this case, it gave me this specific code because this is the next one available. And of course, the connections, they have to be unique, the codes. The description can be changed. You can add anything here. You can say HubSpot test or live or just, anything that makes sense to you. The same process here, we just save it, right? And then we have the same button. So copy, authorize, test, and redesign. Of course, we want to authorize it, and you'll get to see the same message here. I'll just click on it. And then here, I want to use my test account, scroll down, and then it has been authorized. So in this case, the token has been saved and I can test my connection. So you will now see this message authorized and then the date and time and the user that did that. And then I want to test it, of course, just to make sure I can connect to it and we don't have any kind of issues. So we were able to connect, and then we will have to redesign and see how that goes. So let's see if it starts. Yeah, so it will start reading the layout from HubSpot. You will not see all the objects here because it will only show you the total number of objects. It's a different way of reading the data from HubSpot, but other way, you should be able to see the full objects layout here in Rapidi when you want to set up a new transfer. And then if we go, for example, to a transfer and we just open, we go to browse table layout. Then, for example, here, if I go to Salesforce, mine was number 5. If I say contact, for example, then I get to see this object. And if I'm searching for something specific, let's say if we have order, then I will be able to see this. And then when you look at this layout, you would see this object and all the corresponding fields. So what you have access to right now. If on this object you will create new fields tomorrow, then you have to go to this specific connection, redesign, and then those new fields will show up here as part of this layout. So that would be the process. And then when you come here and you want to check a specific object, you search for it. If you cannot find it, then you need to redesign, or you do not have the right access to it. So that's also important because sometimes you might have specific access, let's say to accounts, contact opportunities, but then you don't really have access to some custom objects that you need. So you have to go in, update your permissions, and make sure that you can access those custom objects. And then, of course, the same thing happens for HubSpot. So if I search for contacts, then I should be able to see everything that I have for those specific, let's say, objects. And here, the same process. So if you create new fields, then redesign, so then they are added to the layout. If you create custom objects, the same thing, redesign, so that you can see those here and use them on the transfers that you are setting up. So that would be more or less the process for that. let me see here. We'll go back to our recap. Okay, so what's really important here is that you use an integration user. Very important, because we have seen situations where customers would use their own access, their own Salesforce access, and then when that person would leave the company, then the integration would break, basically. So that was not great. So in that case, just use this integration user. You have it included by default. You don't have to pay for it. You just need to assign permission sets to this user, and then you are good to go. The same thing applies to HubSpot. Use just a specific user. Right now, HubSpot does not have this type of integration user setup, but you can still set up like a special user that you would use only for integration purposes. So then you can track any changes, anything that's happening, right, on your integration. And again, important when it comes to security and permissions, you have to grant only the necessary permissions. So then make sure that you don't give more access than required, right? So if in Salesforce you can set up an integration user, just give it the right access, like the minimum that's required for this to work. Don't give it more than it needs. And the same thing for HubSpot. And then for testing environments in Salesforce, like I mentioned before, it's very easy to get access to a sandbox environment. From your live environment, you can go in and request a sandbox instance, which can take, let's say, a couple of hours to be created. And as soon as you have it rated, you can access it and then just play around. And of course, like I said, if you have a refresh, then you have to reauthorize the connection, go through the same process so that you can connect to the new sandbox instance. And and then in HubSpot, the same thing. Better to use a sandbox environment. That's a copy of your live environment so that you can set up the integration, test, and then when you are all good with everything, you can go into the production environment. So I think, when it comes to testing, you have options both with Salesforce and HubSpot. One thing I want to mention about the Salesforce sandbox environment is that if you are the one that initiates the sandbox, let's say, environment creation, then you would automatically become the admin of that environment. So if you log in into your Salesforce live environment and you request this sandbox environment, then you are the admin. So then you would log in into the sandbox environment with the same credentials. But if you need to add other people to that environment, you need to do it because you would be the only admin, right? So that's something that you need to keep in mind when you want to have a team added to that specific environment. And then of course, rate limits and API usage. Of course, keep that in mind. With Salesforce, you have a specific number of API calls allowed per 24 hours, and with HubSpot it's a bit different. Here you have certain burst limits or even daily limits. Now depends what kind of subscription you have and what kind of services you are paying for there. So I think that's more or less when it comes to Salesforce and HubSpot, everything you need to know so that you can set it up without any issues. Let's see if we have any questions. Well, no questions. Well, it means that everything has been explained really well. But of course, you will get the recording and everything and all the documentation afterwards. So if you need to go into Rapidi and create a new Salesforce or HubSpot connection, you can follow those steps. We also have instructions that you can look at in case you don't remember, but it's a very straightforward process, easy, and it's just important to go through those steps that I explained, and then you should be able to connect to any instance. Now, we do want to show here the next sessions that we have. So the first one would be the main page. So this is where you see everything, all the sessions. than the season 1, so to speak, that we have. So we want to see how this goes and what feedback we get so that we can improve and add more content. And then the last point would be session number 5, which is about a field mapping. So here we would take a look at formulas, and transformations that you can work on when you are building an integration. So if it's something that's interesting or something that you need right now, you can join that session. If you cannot join it, then not a problem. You can register so that you get all the materials afterwards. So you get everything from us, and then you will be good to go. And here is the complete schedule. So the other sessions that we have, if you see one of them that it's interesting and you want to join, just go ahead, register, and then we should be able to go through that specific content. And of course, if you have any feedback you want to share, if you want us to cover, new content or something very specific, just let us know. You can go to this feedback form, add all the details, and then we will take a look and we'll do our best to prepare content for you. Here we have resources. So we have documentation. It's our wiki. We always update our wiki and add more content. But I always say that, so if you are searching for something and you're not finding it, just reach out because we do want to have everything there. And then I will make sure that the content is available. If you need support, you have here, different ways to reach out to us. You can submit it via the website or just send an email. And then we have our product updates. So if you want to get good content in your inbox, subscribe to our updates. And then you will be able to get everything that we write about, which is really interesting. And then we have the product release notes. They are very important, I think, for customers in general. So then you will be able to see what we have released, what's new, what has changed. So we want to keep everybody up to date. So if you need to know anything about a particular release, you can click on that link and then you'll see everything that we have worked on and fixed, improved, or added, I would say. So everything is there. It's available for everybody. I'll check again just to make sure if we have any questions. So all good. Then thank you very much for joining. I hope that I have explained well how to connect to Salesforce and HubSpot. If I haven't and you have more questions, you can reach out and I will definitely get back to you and explain more. And hopefully I will see you when we have our next session, right, about field mappings. Make sure to register, join, so then we can go through mappings and transformations. Thank you very much again and have a lovely day.